My name is Camille Hartley. I was a cyber intelligence officer who served 22 years in the U.S. Department of Defense. I went through top-secret missions and operated in dark data zones most of the world will never know about. But no one ever taught me how to survive when it's your own family who turns against you. That day, I wore my uniform to a nationally televised hearing, and the person standing across from me, publicly accusing me of being a national security threat, was my half-sister, Sloan Whitaker, who was running for Senate. I didn't defend myself. I simply pulled out a USB drive and said, "If today is about the truth, then let the whole country hear it." Have you ever had your own blood turn into your enemy because you dared to speak the truth they wanted buried? If this story makes you feel something, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so I can tell you more about the things they never wanted anyone to know. I was born and raised in a family where honor was measured in medals. My father, General Harold Hartley, once carried 2 stars on his shoulders and had a single motto hanging in the center of his office. No one needs to know what you do, only that you did right. I understood that very early. When I was 10, my mother died of pancreatic cancer. A quiet, creeping illness. And like everything else in that house, pain was meant to happen in silence. She never complained, never left behind a journal, only a folded silk handkerchief tucked in the last drawer, embroidered with the words, "Camille, don't let others decide how you'll be remembered." Less than a year later, Evelyn appeared. She was beautiful, graceful, spoke softly, and carried herself like a prepared speech. I didn't hate Evelyn. Honestly, I thought she helped my father feel like life was still in order after the loss. But I never felt like she saw me as a daughter. I was the shadow of a woman who came before, and that shadow was too silent to fight back. Sloan was born when I was 13. I still remember my father standing by the hospital window, hands in his pockets, staring into the rain as he said to me, "This girl will be what your mother wanted for you, but maybe you've already gone a different way." I didn't ask what he meant. I only knew I was no longer the only girl, and that changed everything. Sloan grew up with everything I didn't have. Birthday parties full of balloons, praise without achievement, and invisible hands guiding her every step. Evelyn would always say, "Sloan was born to speak to crowds, and Camille was born to listen." It sounded like a compliment. I applied to West Point at 17. No one saw me off except the base driver. The last time I spoke to Sloan before leaving, she asked why I wanted to wear a uniform instead of a prom dress, like everyone else's sister. I learned not to take comments like that to heart. I served quietly for over 2 decades. From the Balkans to the Middle East, from temporary deployments to unnamed covert missions. I wasn't in the news. I didn't come home for Thanksgiving. I never posted on Facebook. But I sent money back home regularly until the day my father said, "No need anymore. The family's doing fine." And by fine, he meant Sloan had graduated from an Ivy League school, landed a job in a senator's office, and was dating a businessman who'd made the cover of Forbes Under 40. The only time the whole family gathered in the past 10 years was at my father's funeral. I remember that afternoon vividly. The funeral home in Alexandria was filled with men in uniform and elegantly dressed women in black. In the front row was my stepmother and Sloan, in a fitted ash gray dress and cold high heels, her gaze even colder as she looked at me. "You made it?" He was my father. She held her silence, but during the eulogy a faint smile flickered. Calculated, not mourning, not out of emotion. But because she knew, all the cameras that day would be pointed at her. A week after the funeral, I returned to my small apartment in Arlington, and that very day, a steel box with no sender name was left at my door. It was heavier than I expected. No note, no message, just a USB drive wrapped in velvet. I plugged it into my laptop, and from the very first line on the screen, I knew. This wasn't a condolence gift. It was a last confession. And evidence. At that moment, I didn't know what I was stepping into. But I knew one thing. If my father chose to send it to me, not to Sloan, then he must have known what was rotting behind this family's polished image. I thought the USB would only contain old photos, maybe private voice memos my father left as a final conversation from beyond the grave. But when the screen loaded a multi-layered encryption interface, the kind used in internal government networks, my heartbeat slowed. As if my body already sensed what my mind hadn't yet named. It took more than 2 minutes to decrypt. In cyber intelligence, 2 minutes isn't long, but it's never random. My father wanted to be sure that whoever opened it was someone he trusted to have the patience and the skill. I nearly held my breath as the first video file appeared. A fixed camera recording, high definition, no logos, no timestamps. The room was a wide, windowless office. Ceiling lights cast sharp definition on the faces at the conference table. I recognized my sister instantly. Sloan Whitaker, in a pearl gray blazer, neatly tied brown hair, thin glasses. She was seated across from a man in a dark navy suit. No badge, no name tag, but to me, someone who had analyzed nonverbal behavior for nearly 20 years, it was obvious. He wasn't a politician. He was a handler. The kind who lets others face the cameras while he manages the data stream behind them. He introduced himself with a short name, Brandon Kellis. I'd never seen him in person, but that name had appeared in an internal 2014 report about private companies involved in operating the national energy data systems. That report was quietly shut down. Reason: insufficient evidence. His voice was low and firm. We need Level 3 access to the veteran security system. The initial data packet will be processed as technical assistance, but after that you'll need to ensure your people in Congress don't raise questions when the surplus budget moves through. Sloan nodded, expressionless. I have only one request. No one mentions my name outside this room. Camille? Canis asked. She believes in the military oath more than the law itself. She won't suspect anything, unless someone leaves a stupid trail. I didn't blink through the entire video, over 14 minutes long. No threats, no money exchanged, everything disguised in the language of administration and technical support. But as someone who had decoded hundreds of intercepted messages in gray zone operations, I knew every part of that video was real, and far more dangerous than I expected. When I opened the folder titled Recommended Support List, I saw over 80 names. Most were veterans, some alive, some fallen. And then I stopped at the 27th name. Jacob Everett. I almost couldn't bring myself to click on his file. I remembered Jacob, the young soldier from Georgia who insisted on carrying his guitar into conflict zones because music keeps us from turning to stone. I had thought I protected him by pulling him out of a deployment near the Deir ez-Zor border. He returned home, safe, I told myself. At least one won't be swallowed. And now, his name appeared on a list of those receiving psychological therapy funded by the Eastern Veterans Recovery Fund, a fund that, according to the attached data, was sponsored by Kellis Strategies. I opened the file attached to Jacob's record. There was a medical evaluation, a VA file number, even a digital signature, but one detail didn't add up. Jacob's digital signature was the old version, used before 2017, and I knew for a fact Jacob had updated his profile in 2020 after a car accident injured his right hand. He could no longer sign the same way. The signature was fake. I sat still. Lines of code ran across the screen like they were accusing my own family. Sloan and Kellis weren't exploiting veteran identities to justify budget flows. They were using real data, real names, real trauma, to construct fake aid files, extract funds, and mask unauthorized access into classified systems. And they were using my name as the perfect cover. I closed the laptop, my palms damp with cold sweat. For the first time in years, the tightness in my chest wasn't from mission stress. It was from anger. Anger at myself for staying silent too long. Anger for thinking family distance was too small a thing to dig into. I was wrong. This was never a family conflict. It was an anonymous war, and I had been pushed straight into the center, not by weapons, but by blood. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen on the USB, not old teammates, not superiors, not even the lawyer who helped me handle my father's affairs last year. I knew exactly what happens when someone speaks too soon in a system built to protect the wrong people, especially when that person's last name is Whitaker. I chose the old way. Investigate in silence. I started by verifying other profiles on the list. Names like Jacob Everett were not outliers. More than half had been labeled as in treatment at regional mental health facilities. Some of those centers didn't even exist outside of paperwork. I tracked the flow of federal allocations, using a few old access accounts I knew hadn't been revoked. Each night, I sat in my small Arlington apartment, all lights off, the glow of the screen reflecting in my reading glasses. And piece by piece, the picture formed. Fake aid funds were being broken into microtransactions to stay below audit thresholds, funneled through auxiliary veteran grants, then laundered through so-called tech programs that programs competed with, costing billions of dollars, all of which traced back to Kellis strategies. Sloan never signed anything directly, but I found her internal email being used to schedule off-hour meetings with Brandon Kellis, at least 5 times, inside a guarded private residence in Bethesda. They thought everything was tight, and it would have been if I hadn't clicked on a file labeled draft preclearance_CHT. The last 3 letters, CHT. Camille Hartley. I opened it, only to find my own file, with a fake psychological diagnosis, notes stating mild paranoia indicators, prone to agitation under stress, and a recommendation for behavioral monitoring, preparing for internal containment if necessary. I read every line, feeling like my skin was being peeled layer by layer. 3 days later, I received a suspension notice. No warning, no in-person meeting, just a cold email from the HR office. Due to unauthorized access of data beyond assigned scope, Camille Hartley is hereby placed on temporary suspension pending internal review. I knew who was behind it, and I also knew the game had begun. News hit the internet the very next day. A few websites quietly published a short line. Former intelligence officer Camille Hartley suspended for breaching security protocols. Internal sources cite possible PTSD following her final deployment in Syria. Then the posts spread fast. Old footage resurfaced, including a clip of me testifying in 2017, when I slammed my hand on a congressional table, furious about cuts to veteran reintegration support. I had raised my voice, and now that moment was being used as evidence. Sloan appeared on CNN. She wore a soft blue dress, looked calm and compassionate, and her voice was so gentle it chilled me. My sister served this country for over 20 years, but war leaves marks that not everyone overcomes. My family has always tried to support her, but some things are beyond our reach. She needs rest. She needs treatment, not to go online spreading unverified accusations. I turned off the TV, but her words echoed in my head like a bugle. Not to rally for war, but to destroy my name. The way Sloan looked straight into the camera, eyes slightly teary, her voice catching on the words, my sister. It was so flawless I felt sick. This wasn't politics. This was a public performance to erase me. Permanently. One night, while reviewing my personal device's encryption logs, I noticed a system monitoring process running out of sync. It was spyware, embedded beneath the operating system, the kind used internally by defense agencies to flag unstable personnel. I hadn't installed it. I'd traced the install source. The IP led back to a proxy server managed by Kellis's firm. And more damning, The installation approval came from a user account registered under the Ohio State Senator's office, where Sloan worked. I remained motionless. No panic, no anger. Only one question circling in my head. What are they afraid I'll find? I stood up, shut the laptop, disconnected every network, pulled the phone battery, opened the window and let the cold air sweep through the room. I knew I was about to step into a dark zone. No maps, no team, no orders, no flag to salute. Only one thing to guide me. My truth. And maybe that's exactly why they were doing everything, to make sure I never found it. I didn't have many people to call at that point. Most of the people I'd worked with had moved on, into teaching, retirement, or silence. But there was still Travis Monroe. Travis and I used to work together at Ramstein, back when I was in charge of assessing cybersecurity systems for US bases across Europe. He was a special technical advisor from the Pentagon at the time. Quiet, half smiling, and never used public Wi-Fi. If there was anyone both capable and trustworthy enough to help me stay off the radar, it was Travis. I used a temporary satellite phone I always kept inside the first aid kit and sent a message with only 3 words: "Need to talk." 2 hours later, I got a reply, encrypted with the custom cipher we had used during a joint op back in 2012. Cabin Lakeview. Tuesday. No devices. I arrived on time. The cabin was deep in the Virginia woods near a lake. Old but clean. Travis was already there, holding a thermos, giving me a look that was half serious, half sarcastic. "Haven't seen you in a while. Thought you'd settled down with the civilized folks." I shrugged. Too civilized. They shut down my personal network. We didn't waste time. I placed the encrypted drive on the table and pulled out a data flowchart I had mapped, outlining the paths of multiple shady transactions. Travis stared at the diagram for almost 5 minutes before speaking in his low, dry tone. This isn't money laundering. They're using veteran identities as cover. And the route? He pointed at a cluster of IP addresses I had circled in red. "From the internal network of the Department of Defense," I said, "to a server in Panama registered under a company called Linbridge Holdings, a subsidiary of Kellis Strategies." He went silent for a beat, then pulled out his laptop. An old, near-untouched machine with no plugins, running only the decryption suite he had built himself. "You'll need someone else to help process this code. You're not fast enough alone." "I know, and I called her." I looked up. "Were you back on Earth?" "Riley Chen." Travis let out a low whistle. "That kid bypassed Fort Drum's firewall just to prove there was a flaw." He paused. "She hits hard. We don't have time to hit soft, Travis." Riley showed up the next morning. She looked almost exactly the same as the day she got blacklisted from government systems. Black hair tied high, gray hoodie, and always clicking a ballpoint pen like she was encrypting thoughts. "Camille." She grinned. Part respect, part challenge. "Thought you disappeared for good." "I tried," I said, handing her the drive. The 3 of us sat around the wooden cabin table like a strange wartime decryption unit, except instead of military maps, we were staring down lines of code crossing borders, stolen identities, and government-level access codes being exploited. Riley typed quickly, the screen's glow bouncing off her cheekbones. "Damn. You know what? Someone used your level 3 clearance to validate access across 3 systems. VA, DoD, and even VHA." I held in a breath. "Which means they're tunneling through using your credentials. You're the shell." Riley looked up. "They're impersonating you to unlock entire partitions of data without raising alarms. And you're the only one who can't explain any of it," Travis added slowly. "Because they already slapped you with a PTSD tag and revoked all your access." I looked down at my hands. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from rage. Riley kept working. 2 hours later, she paused, and her face darkened. "You want the worst part? Say it." In the last log entry, there's a data packet that was decrypted and exported under the title Federal Air Defense Emergency Response System. It was sent out at 2 a.m. 1 week ago. And she stopped, turning the screen toward me. The recipient IP is tied to a cybersecurity firm in Zurich, the same firm that was once investigated for involvement in the 2016 cyber attack. But there wasn't enough proof. Travis shook his head. This isn't financial fraud anymore, Camille. This is unlocking the U.S. defense systems for a foreign entity. And they're using me as the access key, I said. If we don't stop it, Travis added, next time it won't be fake aid files. It might be military mobilization, or shutting down the entire national infrastructure. And what was at stake? Wasn't my reputation anymore. It was the survival of a system I once swore to protect, even if that meant standing against my own blood. I don't know why I chose that particular afternoon to go. The sky was a dull gray, the first chill of autumn hung in the air. Not cold enough to shiver, but not warm enough to breathe easy. Evelyn's house, the one I had grown up in, looked different from the outside now. Not because of fresh paint or the neatly trimmed vines, but because I no longer saw it through the eyes of a child. I showed up unannounced and pressed the bell. She answered after the third ring. Still Evelyn as I remembered her. Hair neatly brushed, soft beige cashmere sweater, an expressionless face that never lacked polish. The way she looked at me, she wasn't unfriendly, nor was she welcoming. Only the kind of polite fatigue worn like a pressed blouse. Camille, she said, like greeting an old colleague. Come in. I stepped through the doorway, my chest tightening as I passed the old photo of my father hanging on the wall, the one of him in uniform, standing between me and Sloane, each of us on a side, his eyes not looking at the camera, but at me. I still remembered the day that photo was taken. I didn't want to smile. Sloane smiled brightly. The living room hadn't changed. Warm yellow lights, a silent wall-mount fireplace, and the same brown leather armchair where my father used to read the Saturday paper. You know why I'm here? I said as Evelyn poured the tea. She didn't answer right away. She set the pot down, opened the drawer beside the fireplace cabinet, and pulled out a neatly clipped folder. She placed it on the table in front of me. I figured the time would come when you'd ask. I stared at the folder's cover. I didn't have to open it to know. Legal paperwork. I opened it anyway. Just as I thought. Full share transfer agreement, Hartley Security Systems. Signed by Harold M. Hartley. Recipient, Sloane Whitaker. Date, 1 month before his death. My father never said a word to me about this. Evelyn clasped her hands. He didn't want you dragged into it. Didn't want me dragged into it. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. He left me an encrypted USB containing proof that Sloane was colluding with a firm exploiting veteran identities to access U.S. defense systems. And you think that's how he was protecting me? He didn't know the details, Evelyn replied, eyes avoiding mine. He only saw she was getting too deep into politics, and he thought if you found out, you'd do something irreversible. Well, he was right, I whispered. I am. Evelyn said nothing. I turned to the final page. A loose sheet of paper, handwritten. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Bold, slightly slanted, each stroke firm like his voice had been. If you're reading this, then it's time to choose between silence and honor. Just one line. I don't understand. Why would he sign over the entire company to Sloane if he suspected her? Evelyn exhaled slowly, her voice dropping to something close to a confession. He was under pressure. Sloane brought in a team of advisors and said if he didn't transfer control soon, the company would lose access to the new federal security contract. That it was necessary to keep the company in the game. You know Harold. He couldn't stand being sidelined from any strategy. He signed out of pride, I said coldly. He signed because he trusted his daughter, Evelyn corrected. A mistake, maybe, but not because he didn't love you. I let out a dry laugh. Right. He loved me, the way a man loves someone he assumes will survive on her own. I looked around. Every corner, every object in this house used to be part of my memories. Now everything felt like a shell, polished, intact, and hollow. Do you know what Sloane's doing with that data? I asked, eyes fixed on Evelyn. She looked up, her lips tightening. I know, some of it. But I didn't think it was this serious. And you chose to stay silent? Because I didn't want to lose both daughters. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. I was never your daughter, Evelyn. She said nothing, only met my eyes, the calm in hers now blurred by quiet conflict. So what now? I asked. Are you going to stand with Sloane, or keep pretending you're not involved? Evelyn picked up her teacup but didn't drink. She simply said, softly, My daughter may have lost her way, but you're more like your father than anyone I've ever known. And that, Camille, is both what I admire in you and what I fear for you. I stood up and closed the folder. I don't need your admiration, and I don't need your fear. I just need to know, if I fall in this fight, at least one person in this family knows where the truth began. I turned away, gripping the note my father had left like it was the only red thread still connecting me to him. Not through blood, but through duty. I submitted an emergency hearing request on a Monday morning. The request was sent through a secure channel directly to the Senate Select Committee on National Security, along with a full copy of the evidence Travis and I had verified, including data routes, IP addresses, electronic authentications, and the video recording of the meeting between Sloane and Brandon Kellis. I didn't expect it to be accepted. Filings like that usually got buried by the very people who didn't want the system leaking any further. But less than 48 hours later, I received a notice. Committee summons for special hearing. Witness: Camille Hartley. Mandatory appearance. The news spread like wildfire. Every evening broadcast covered it. National security whistleblower identified as former officer Camille Hartley, half-sister of Ohio Senate candidate Sloane Whitaker. The media split. On television, commentators spun conspiracy theories. I was a bitter failure trying to sabotage her sister's political career. A mentally unstable veteran who couldn't handle being cut off from the family. Some even sneered. This woman thinks honor is something you can use as evidence? But others spoke up in support. Veterans, former colleagues, even a few progressive senators. An independent news channel replayed a clip of me speaking at a memorial event at Fort Meade with a caption, "Silent for 22 years, she finally speaks." And me? I remained silent. I stayed silent. No press, no interviews, no online statements. I spent 3 days preparing. Not a testimony. The truth. The day of the hearing, the sun was mild. The Capitol building was packed. Outside, protesters held up signs both supporting and condemning me. One banner read, "Camilla, patriot or traitor?" I walked past without looking. Inside, the main hearing room felt like a stage. High ceilings, wood-paneled walls, warm yellow lights. Everything designed to make sure no one could retreat once they sat in the witness chair. Sloane sat in the front row with her private attorney, Martha Ellington, one of the most renowned litigators on the East Coast. She looked razor-sharp, cold-eyed, with a voice that didn't need to be loud to make people stop typing. The chair of the hearing was Senator Raymond Jeffers, a seasoned former Marine, not easily swayed. When he called my name, the room went silent. I stepped up to the witness stand, wearing my formal dress uniform. Not to impress, but because I wasn't going to let anyone else define who I was. "Please proceed, Colonel Hartley." I opened my statement, my voice steady, low, neither raised nor subdued. I, Camille Hartley, swear before this nation's highest representative body that what I am about to present is the truth, and I am not here to defend myself. I am here to defend those whose identities were exploited in a breach of national security. Ellington stood immediately. "As chairman, we must note, this witness has a documented history of post-combat stress disorder. Internal records cite mild paranoia, sleep disruption, and unstable emotional response under high-pressure environments. These conditions impair judgment and perception. She turned to me and offered a faint smile. Colonel, have you ever suspected any family member of conspiring against you before? I looked her directly in the eyes. Not suspected. Confirmed. A few chuckles rose behind me. Jeffers struck his gavel. Order! Allington stepped closer. So you're saying that one of the Senate's most promising candidates, Sloan Whitaker, manipulated veteran data, transferred information to foreign entities, and orchestrated a national security breach? Based on what? An anonymous video? I'd pulled a USB from my folder. Anonymous. Recorded, stored, and sent to me by my father 1 week after his death. Jeffers motioned to the tech officer. The large screen behind him lit up. I stood tall, eyes locked on Sloan. The video played. Every word, every glance, every gesture between her and Brandon Kellis during that closed-door meeting. I have only one request. No one mentions my name outside this room. Camille? She believes in the military oath more than the law itself? The hearing room was silent. I looked up as the camera landed on Sloan. She didn't flinch. No rage, no rebuttal. Only the absence of color in her face. I continued presenting verified evidence, geolocation data, transaction flow extractions, identities of the veterans used, access timestamps, and server addresses. Each data point came with a real name, a real person. Mr. Chairman, I concluded, they used my badge, my clearance, my reputation as their shield. But they forgot one thing. I can't stay silent forever. Jeffers nodded, eyes narrowed like he was sighting down a rifle. Thank you, Colonel Hartley. We'll forward the materials to the Department of Justice and Federal Security for further action. I didn't look at Sloan again as I stepped away from the stand. I could only feel the cold radiating from where she sat, like a thin crack spreading beneath the glossy surface of something that once seemed flawless. The day after the hearing, the media exploded. Brandon Kellis, CEO of security firm Kellis Strategies, arrested at Dulles Airport while attempting to board a flight to Zurich. Images of him in handcuffs, head down, wrinkled shirt under a thin coat, played on repeat for the next 48 hours. The face once hidden in technical reports now flooded every screen. No more shadows to disappear into backstage. I watched it all from the small kitchen TV in Travis's old house, where I was staying for a few days to avoid the press camped outside my apartment. Riley sat beside me, eating dry cereal from a bowl in one hand, still typing with the other. Should have nabbed him 2 years ago, she muttered, eyes glued to the screen. I don't think the system wanted to look that closely back then, I replied. Not until it cracked. She glanced at me. You were the crack. Sloan hadn't been arrested. I knew it would come, sooner or later, but it was the space between truth revealed and legal action that drained me most. Like standing on a battlefield after the final gunshot. No more explosions, but no one sure if there's still a landmine underfoot. Her campaign was immediately suspended. Donors withdrew. The media turned faster than they had ever built her up. Articles once calling her a rising star of a new political generation, now struck through their headlines, replaced with phrases like collusion, suspect, identity fraud, national security threat. I knew Sloan was watching. She always controlled the flow of information, even when everything collapsed. Proof? A text message came in at 2:17 a.m., just one line. You won this time, but who'll stand by you next time? No greeting, no name. I stared at the words on my phone for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, thinking of a reply, and then deleted it. I understood. She didn't need an answer. She wanted me to know. I'd taken the one thing she couldn't stand to lose. Control. And in Sloan's world, losing control was worse than prison. I put the phone down. Evelyn, as always, chose to appear in front of a camera rather than face me in person. She gave a short interview with a local reporter. Clean, bright backdrop, cream cardigan, hair pinned neatly, as if this was both tragedy and an opportunity to showcase composure. "We respect the investigation process and trust the law to do its job," she said. When asked about me, she replied, "Camille is someone with a history of service and of trauma. But with everything happening now, I no longer maintain any personal connection with her." I listened to those words in the quiet of the room, air purifier humming behind me. Travis stood by the stove, quietly pouring coffee. Neither of us needed to say anything. We both understood. I pulled my father's handwritten note from my pocket. It was worn now, the edges folded thin. "If you're reading this, then it's time to choose between silence and honor." I used to think he wrote it to test me, but now I think he wrote it because he knew, in the end, I would be alone, and he wanted to make sure my hand wouldn't shake when it happened. 3 days later, I received an email from an anonymous address. No subject line. One attachment, a copy of an internal document. An order for the temporary detention of Sloan Whitaker for federal investigation. No signature, but at the bottom, a handwritten note. "You're not alone, Colonel." I read it again and again. It could have been Travis, could have been Riley, could have been someone I'll never meet. But that didn't matter anymore. I didn't return to the military. Not because I was angry, not because they wouldn't have me. The truth is, they would. After the hearing, I got a call from Brigadier General McAllister, my direct superior for nearly 8 years. There was no apology. There didn't need to be. All he said was, "Hartley, you did what no one else had the guts to do. If you want back in, I've got a spot waiting." I was quiet for a moment, then replied softly, "Sir, I don't want to fight in the dark anymore. I want to turn on the light." There was no surprise in his voice, only one final thing. "Then light it up, Hartley." We founded Silent Trace on an October afternoon in a small rented office above an old auto shop in Fairfax. The sign was simple. A metal plate with engraved letters. No logo, no slogan. We needed the right people to find us. Travis handled technical analysis, Riley built the data filters. I wrote letters to every veteran whose identity had been stolen. By hand, line by line. We had no major funding, no spotlight, no support from above. Only a table worn by time, 3 tired machines, and a vow that needed no words. If you were once forgotten by the system, someone would still look back for you. A week after our quiet opening, I received a handwritten letter from Jacob Everett. The sender name was written in that familiar slanted script. I recognized it instantly. I'd seen him write lyrics by flashlight during night watch, strumming his guitar beside a supply crate, mumbling, "Slanted writing feels sadder, don't you think?" I opened the letter slowly, my chest heavy as I read the first line. "Camille, I don't know where to begin. I used to think the system abandoned me after service. No email, no check-in, no explanation when my file got suspended out of nowhere. Then I got a call from the VA saying I'd been approved for level 4 PTSD treatment benefits. Funny thing is, I never applied. I knew something was wrong, but I also knew I was too small to fight it. I paused, tasting the bitterness in my throat, until I saw you, in uniform, standing on camera, not bowing your head. I cried. Because for the first time, I heard my name spoken by someone who wasn't trying to exploit it. I used to think my name had been erased from the system, but then I saw you stand, for people like me. No fancy words, no praise. And it turned out, being called by your real name, in a place no one expects justice, might be the one thing that keeps someone from giving up. That night, Travis got home late, and Riley fell asleep on the small sofa beside the humming server. I stayed alone in the narrow room, the screen blinking softly like a steady breath. I placed Jacob's letter in a small wooden box, next to my father's note and the original draft of my hearing request. 3 priceless things, not for their legal weight, but for what they marked. Choices made. In a world where everything can be staged, sold, or rewritten, maybe silence at the right moment and a voice in the right place are the only things that can't be faked. The minutes blurred. I remained in place, unmoving, letting the stillness say what I couldn't. I wasn't writing, or typing, or planning the next move. I was simply still. At peace, not because I'd won, but because I no longer had to pretend I didn't see. I turned off my phone at 9:12 p.m. I didn't want any sound cutting through that moment. The light in the room wasn't strong enough to show my reflection clearly in the mirror, but enough to see my hand, the same hand I once placed over my heart to take the oath, the same hand I had to clench to keep from shaking when I stood alone before a nation. The room was so quiet I could hear the desk lamp ticking from the heat. A breeze slipped through the not-quite-closed window. On the corner of the desk, Jacob's letter rested beside my father's note. Everything was there. No audience needed. I used to think war ended when I left the battlefield. When I walked away from sand-covered roads, sudden gunfire, and names etched in granite. Never to be called again. But no one taught me some battlefields don't echo with gunshots. In over 2 decades of service, I never had to choose between loyalty to my country and keeping peace in my family. But this time, I couldn't have both. Someone once asked me if I regretted exposing Sloan. I didn't answer right away. Because I knew, in this world, the truth doesn't always get applause. Most of the time, it gets dismissed for being inconvenient, for disrupting the carefully arranged order people build so they can sleep at night. Sloan once had everything: image, power, support. And me? I had only the quiet that comes from someone who's seen the worst of what humans can do to one another, and still chooses to believe in what's right. A week later, I received a letter from someone I didn't know. It came through regular mail, handwritten envelope, bold slanted script, Laura B., Nebraska, she wrote. My husband passed away last year due to PTSD complications. He used to say the most painful part wasn't the nightmares. It was feeling like his name no longer meant anything in the system he once served. When I saw you read out the names of those whose identities were stolen, and his name was among them, I cried. For the first time, I felt like he was called again. Not to be used, but to be remembered. Thank you for saying their names right, even if only once. I read that letter by the window, a light breeze pulling in the scent of old wood and early winter air. I folded it carefully and placed it beside Jacob's letter, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that I hadn't strayed from why I started. That evening, Travis handed me a draft of our new project, a system to detect early signs of identity fraud in veterans' healthcare centers. Riley was testing an AI model she jokingly called the Data Whisperer, because it learned how to spot anomalies using what she called data intuition. I watched them work quietly. It had been a long time since I'd seen a form of fighting that didn't involve weapons, a form of protection that didn't need walls, and a form of patriotism that didn't ask for medals. The stillness in that room wasn't empty. It was like standing on the edge between survival and surrender, and realizing you've made it through. Not gloriously, not loudly, but whole. And sometimes, that's enough. I still remember how it felt standing at that witness stand. Not fear, but a strange kind of quiet, like everything inside me had reached the end of its endurance. But what kept me going wasn't anger, or even a need to clear my name. It was knowing, if I didn't speak that day, how many others would go on being treated like names no one bothers to read? Maybe all of us at some point face a choice: stay silent to preserve the appearance of peace, or step out of the safety zone to hold on to what's right, even if we're the only one left who believes in it. What about you? If it were you in that moment, what would you choose? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Not to judge, but to understand the quiet battles each of us has walked through. And if this meant something to you, don't forget to follow the channel for more stories about courage, about betrayal within families, and the quiet moments where people find their way back to themselves. Not through noise, but through unwavering silence. Thank you for listening.